Well, sorry?
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Wow. The audience are extending all the way to the back of the auditorium here. So I'll try to project my voice. I'm sure you can hear me back there. I want to thank Professor for and Teacher Kim and Brzezinski, and of course, Anne for hosting this event. Thank you for inviting me. Yes, the North Korean version of the Tale of Chunhyang. Not that different from the South Korean version, right? You have this daughter of a Kiseng, former Kiseng, who encounters the son, and the son falls in love. Right? This aristocrat falls in love with the daughter, Chunhyang, and really pursues her. Later, they sort of get married unofficially, but he gets sent off to Seoul, while she remains back in Namwon. A new magistrate, a new governor comes in, and this guy is a very sexually active guy, right? He's looking for the hottest woman in Namwon. Has heard about Chunhyang, orders her to come to his quarters, but she refuses because she's a faithful wife. And because he is upset with her resistance, he imprisons her. And her husband, Lee Mong-yong, comes back as a secret agent and discovers the corruption of the governor, the new governor, exposes that corruption, and it's usually this cathartic moment when he reveals himself, not as a beggar, but as this secret serviceman or whatever, secret agent, and everyone flees. The new governor is put away, and he assumes that role. And he and Chunhyang are reunited, and it's a happy ending. So that's generally the story. I'm sure it's not that different from the Chinese version, or what version, and the North Korean version is very much the same. So that's the synopsis, right? So hopefully we all know now, right? All right, so there are three versions in North Korea. The first one was made, the filmic version was made in 1959, 1980, and 1984. Meanwhile, in South Korea, there have been, from 1960 to 1976, there have been about 7 or 8 versions. So let's go back to this. 1959 to 1980, about 20-year gap. Why hasn't North Korea produced anything? If it really is a tale that Koreans love, and North Koreans love it too, if that is the case, why in the past 20 years has there not been another rendition? Whereas in South Korea, from 1960 all the way to about 1976, there have been 8 versions. And trust me, after 1976, there are more. So how much of a beloved tale is this to North Koreans? Why hasn't there been another rendition until 1980? What's going on here? And that's what I want to examine today. What was going on in North Korea in the 1960s all the way to 1980s? Well, first of all, as we know, the North Koreans attempted to adopt the Soviet style of socialist realism. Attempted. It was more of a borrowing. It wasn't necessarily, or maybe a good attempt of emulating the Soviet style, not necessarily the socialist realist style that the Soviet Union wanted. And whenever North Koreans would publish a story, a film, and send it to Soviet Union and say, "Look, we are your little brother. Look how well we are copying you." And the Soviet Union would read it and say, "This is a terrible version of the socialist realist version. You guys have missed the point." And of course, North Korea would come back and say, "Well, you know what? This is our version of socialist realism." And after a while, this. Oh, really?
Yeah.
You can't hear me? Wow.
No. It's really good.
It's being recorded too. Oh, I see. Oh, I see. Okay. I'm afraid I'm going to load the speakers. My voice. Okay. So they were attempting the socialist realist genre all the way through. Well, all the way through the 80s, I would say, and then it sort of faded out. the most important aspect in developing this ideology in North Korea was not only socialist realism, but this idea of motherhood. And this, in some ways, contrasted with the genre of socialist realism. So in a lot of these short stories, novels, film versions in North Korea, the women were depicted as strong because of the gender equality movement. Right? They were portrayed as very strong women. Not someone who is shy, coy, and beautiful like Chunyang. They were rough around the edges. They would talk back to their husbands. Right? This was not a classic, this would not fit with the tale of Chunyang. So the tale of Chunyang could not be reproduced in North Korea during this period. And especially with motherhood, this new idea of how are we going to strengthen the personality cult of Kim Il-sung? How are we going to do this? Before they actually delved into building Kim Il-sung's personality cult, they had to premise that with the motherhood ideology. And I'll get into the motherhood ideology in a second. So the motherhood comes first, and then the personality cult of Kim Il-sung comes. And it really goes into full thrust in 1967. Yes, there have been short stories, novels here and there that show the great leader Kim Il-sung doing his wonderful things in North Korea, yes. But it hasn't been institutionalized yet. But in 1967, the Writers' Union were commissioned to write tales about Kim Il-sung. And two of the most famous novels and filmic versions that came out of this whole personality cult is The Sea of Blood and The Flower Girl, which was apparently very popular in China at the time. The two films, yes, they praise North Korea. They don't directly praise Kim Il-sung, except for Flower Girl. Flower Girl actually mentions Kim Il-sung. Sea of Blood doesn't. But you can see how the film goes away from socialist realism and now moves toward the personality cult of Kim Il-sung. But in so doing, they had to build this ideology of motherhood. In these two films, Sea of Blood and Flower Girl, the two so-called masterpieces, Academy Award-winning films in North Korea, uphold the mother as the central figure in the tale. And then in the 1980s, when the tale of Chunyang was reproduced, the focus shifted more toward Wolme, who is the mother of Chunyang. But I want to compare the South Korean version and the North Korean version, just so that you can see the visuality of how Wolme has changed. This is Hong Seong-gi's tale of Chunyang, 1961, I believe. Here, Lee Mong-young comes to visit Chunyang at night, asking her mother, Wolme, for her daughter. is a very interesting scene. Although it's, you know, it's a very famous scene. Lee Mong-yong asks Won-mi for his hand, for Chun-yang, his hand. And you see Won-mi dressed in the two South Korean versions. You're going to see Won-mi dressed very elaborately, like a former kiseng. Makeup, the hair, and the beautiful silk dress. And the way she's sitting, and she's almost testing Mong-yong. Do you really love her? And it's like a tug of war, right? It's like, I'll give you a little bit, you give me a little bit. I don't trust you. So I want you to write down something. And what they do is they're negotiating here. This is a negotiation process, right? And in the end, at the end of a good negotiation, you have to write down a contract. So he makes her write a contract. And here, it appears that Won-mi, the mother, really cares for Chun-yang. Oh, I don't want her to marry you, and then all of a sudden, if you abandon her, what's going to happen? That's what it appears to be. But here, as soon as Mong-yong writes down the contract, she's about to take it and realizes, oh, wait, this contract is for Chun-yang. And she goes, oh, sorry, you take it, right? So you really see this entrepreneurial characteristic of Won-mi. She's doing this business transaction with an aristocrat. This is an opportunity for Chun-yang to rise up in her status, from a lowly status to an upper status. This was a great opportunity that Won-mi saw. And the way North Korea criticizes this is, how could a mother sell her daughter? How could a mother sell her daughter? That's a terrible mother. Hong Seong-gi's tale is very interesting, but Shin Sang-ok, a very famous South Korean director, also made this film in the same year. In fact, Hong and Shin Sang-ok, which you'll see in a second, they were in competition, but Shin Sang-ok's film was far more popular than Hong Seong-gi's. This scene was quite extended, but in Shin... Oh, can't even see it. Is there a way we can dim the lights? Well, it's okay, actually. It's okay. So this is Shin Sang-ok's version.
도련님께서 용례까지 하시겠소?
부모의 허락이 아니 계시어를 어이 용례라 이르면 그러나 선의 대장부가 감히 길고 이연이 하겠소. 내 맹세하지 내 춘향이를 백년해로의 아내 삼기를 맹세하지.
그렇다면 도련님 용례도 못 이르니 혼서예당 사주단장 겸지 우겸하여 필적이나 한 장 남겨주소.
This is an interesting scene. In the previous film, Lee Mong-yong volunteers to write down the contract. Here, Won-mi demands that Lee Mong-yong write down a contract. So in this version, Won-mi is completely portrayed as an entrepreneurial mother who really is very, very good at negotiating and forces or convinces Lee Mong-yong to assume this role here. Again, in North Korea, this is a terrible mother. Right? So here is North Korea's version. This was made in 1980. The two previous films, I edited very little. I took out some of the dialogue, but it was very minimal editing. In the North Korean version, I had to edit a lot because this scene is really long. Because it really shows how Won-mi, the mother, does not want to give up her daughter. And Lee Mong-yong pursues Chun-yang, not once, because in the previous films, he comes only once, that night, and they settle the negotiation. But here in the North Korean versions, he comes for 2 nights. Right? He comes again and again and again, trying to convince the mother-in-law. The mother-in-law is very important. You gotta convince the mother-in-law.
평생에 한번 있는 인간 대사를 어찌 아픈 자리에서 대답하라 줬지. 내 평생 저것 하나를 열손에 떠박혀서 부모까지 키운 것이라.
내 늙은이 못한 그 춘향을 사랑으로 떠받든 진리의 목숨하고 땅이 변하여 바다가 되고 바다가 말라 땅이 되어도 내 마음 허락하고
이 일을 어찌면 좋고 하지만 그럴 수 없지.
내 어찌 늙은이 앞에 정말 나를 꺼줘.
양간 상념의 차별 하늘과 땅 사이나 본인도 못하는 세상. 도련님을 믿었다가 춘향이 마저 이인이 신세가 되고 많으니 그렇게는 할 수 없소이다. 못했소이다.
One of the more interesting aspects to this is the inclusion of Worme's internal dialogue. Her thinking, what am I to do? How can I give up my daughter to this man? Because Worme was in a very similar situation herself when she was young. She married an aristocrat, thinking that her status will go up. But that promise was not fulfilled by her husband. And so she does not want to put Chunyang in that same position. So in the North Korean version, as you can see, there's a little bit of this the class difference here, right? They're going to always include that part, right? But it's this resistance, Worme's resistance to this aristocrat that is emphasized in this version. Now this is almost more than 10 minutes long, and I had to edit this part. Right? The last scene I want to show you is Shin Sang-wook, the South Korean director, who remade Tale of Chunyang in North Korea. Right? Now he called it 사랑 사랑 내 사랑, which is the title of Saranga, which we heard last night. It's a musical version. It's a huge theatrical production, larger in scale than the one he made in South Korea, and probably, I think, better. I did not put any, this one I really need the lights off, because you got to see this one. This is very interesting here. I did not put any subtitles because I want you to focus not on the dialogue, but on the representation of Worme. So you got to focus on Worme as Shin Sang-wook focuses on her as well.
육면은 갖추지 못한 남자 마음의 표정 그리나 한다 소주사이다.
So he's about to write the contract.
구름 위의 높은 봉이 평지가 될지라도 동해물 깊은 바다 봄같이 될지라도 대장부 한 번 맹세는 천만년 편지.
I hope you caught it. Worme sheds tears. Now we don't really know what Shin Sang-wook means by doing this close-up of Worme's face and showing this tear running down her eyes, her face. Maybe we can say that Worme is so happy that Chunyang is finally, she's capable of going up the ranks, climbing up the social ladder. Maybe. That's not how the North Koreans want to read it, though. The North Koreans want to read it as, it's really sad for me to give up my daughter, right? And that's the way they want us to read it, right? This motherly love that extends to her daughter, and this hardship of raising her. That's what the North Korean versions want us to focus on, right? The hardship of the mother. And this falls along the lines, the motherhood ideology. It falls along those lines because the greatest mother in North Korea, her name is Kang Ban-seok, the mother of Kim Il-sung. And she is idolized almost as much as Kim Il-sung is. Here's a picture of her. And if you notice the way she's dressed, very simple, modest Korean dress. Hair tied as a very simple, ordinary commoner. Not like the wolme in the South Korean versions where her hair is all fancy up like this, right? Very modest. And if you notice the North Korean versions of wolme, that's how she was represented. Here's a very famous picture or portrait of Kang Ban-seok and Kim Il-sung. This is a very famous painting where the mother gives Kim Il-sung 2 pistols as a gift on his 14th birthday, I think? I can't remember, right? They weren't part of the NRA at this point, but it was almost as if, right? And the idea is for Kim Il-sung to achieve revolution, defeat the Japanese. These 2 pistols were used by your father, but he got killed by the Japanese. Now it's your turn. The mother's role in North Korea is to send the child out to achieve revolution. That's the idea of a mother in North Korea. There's a famous novel that depicts this moment when Kim Il-sung, now as an adult, is about to achieve revolution. But in that novel, Kang Ban-seok dies, and she passes away in 1932. On her deathbed, Kim Il-sung is right next to her. On her deathbed, she looks over to her son and says, "Son, what are you doing here? Fight the Japanese." And passes away, right? So it's this till the last dying moment, the mother wants her son to achieve revolution. Forget about me. Your duty is out there. Right? The Sea of Blood, this is the mother in Sea of Blood. Again, the same commoner clothes with the commoner hair, with a child on her back. She's escaping the Japanese who are coming in and terrorizing the village. Later on, she becomes a heroine, and she overthrows the local Japanese police, and she's hailed as a hero at the end. But the entire story of Sea of Blood shows the hardship that the mother endured. The novel itself is 400 pages long. The film itself is 4 hours long, right? It's an epic tale. I mean, we're talking about, you better bring your breakfast, lunch, and dinner for this one, right? I mean, you're going to be sitting there for a while. It centers on the mother, and it shows her evolution from a commoner, ignorant Korean to a conscious, revolutionary consciousness kind of person who achieves and overthrows the Japanese. Here, finally, the Flower Girl. The story is, of course, about the Flower Girl, the famous Hong Young-hee, but the focus is on the mother. It's the tragedy of the mother who cannot physically and economically, financially support her children. She passes away. And her death in the story of Flower Girl is absolutely tragic. Again, the way she's dressed is absolutely modest. And in the preface to the Tale of Chunyang, the novel Tale of Chunyang in North Korea, the author writes, or the editor writes, that Wolme, mother of Chunyang, has been ideologically transformed to fit these 3 women. Kang Ban-seok, the mother of Sea of Blood, and the mother in Flower Girl. In other words, North Korea really struggled with what are we to do with this Tale of Chunyang? It's a beloved story in Korea, but it doesn't match our political ideology. So what are we going to do with this tale? And after a long negotiation process, finally in 1980, they produced the filmic version, and they completely changed the ideology of the film, or the original tale, to fit the North Korean ideology. I'll stop there, and I'll answer more questions later. Thank you very much.